Well, hello there. I was just tucking in the pups and getting ready to sit down and enjoy a good book. Won't you join me? We're going to start with, and I know the green screen kind of screws it up, but you can kind of see it says, Look Out for the Little Guy by Scott Lang, who is not a real person, by the way. He is a fictional character who also goes by Ant-Man, played by the ever handsome and always young, never aging, Paul Rudd. Let's see how the book is, shall we? According to the inside flap, this is the incredible story of an ex-con turned world-saving superhero. Look out for the little guy. All right. Oh, it's by Scott Lang with Rob Kuttner. He must be the real person that wrote this. To my favorite partners, Hope and Cassie, this one's for you. Introduction. Hi there. Howdy. Hey ya. Man, I hate introductions. If you're reading this book, first of all, thank you. Even though I can make my body as large as the Empire State Building, some days my self-esteem gets, well, ant-sized. Maybe that's an occupational hazard of being an Avenger and working alongside the mightiest and smartest people on Earth. But the feeling is still there. Even when I remember that I did help save half the world. Anyway, my name is Scott Lang. You may now, or at one time, have known me as Ant-Man. I've been involved in some superhero stuff you might have heard about, some superhero stuff you probably haven't heard about, and some superhero stuff you might be tired of hearing about, at least if you're anything like my immediate family. But who is Scott Lang? Well, I'm just an average, middle-aged white guy who went to a fancy, nerd college, got married, and landed a solid white-collar desk job. I used to work as a computer guy at VistaCorp, a huge tech firm that deals with security. Oh, the irony of that. But just wait for it. My wife, Maggie, and I had a baby girl named Cassie, and we were heading into an uncomplicated, peaceful suburban life outside of San Francisco. I mean, sure, on our TVs we were watching the world occasionally coming under attack by strange beings, but we also saw this amazing group of superheroes called the Avengers, who always managed to show up exactly when they were needed and send half those baddies back to from where they came, back away from our planet and my life. Sorry, I tried to improvise there and assume what was written. I was wrong. However, there were still some baddies right here on Earth, specifically in my workplace. As I began to discover over time, my company was not completely on the up and up. Under the misguidance of my boss, the company I was working at, VistaCorp, started using its prowess with security to take advantage of customers. Specifically, someone either overlooked or deliberately created a glitch in the payment processing software, skimming millions of dollars from customer accounts. I decided I was not okay with that. After multiple attempts to push back against the company, attempts that one might describe as legal or reasonable or advisable, I decided to go in a different direction. I'd like to start with the positives. I returned $5 million to our customers and exposed VistaCorp's nefarious dealings to the public. And on the other side, I also drove an extremely expensive sports car and an extremely expensive pool and myself into San Quentin Federal Penitentiary for 3 years. Even worse, this was also around the time that my marriage to Maggie broke up. I don't want to get into the specifics of why. That's strictly Scott Maggie stuff, but let's just say husband suddenly going to the pen for 3 years wasn't exactly a marriage saver. More critically, though, that divorce plus imprisonment effectively separated me from my dear, sweet daughter, Cassie. For way too many of her precious first few years, I wondered if she and I would ever even have the chance to make a connection. Eventually, I finished my sentence, left San Q, and attempted to rejoin the world, even if the world didn't quite seem to know what to do with me yet. I couldn't get a job with a conviction on my record. I had no funds or place to stay. Even my one joyful attempt to reunite with Cassie was cut short by Maggie and her fiance telling me I had to get my life together before we could talk visitation or shared custody. Fortunately, though, there was one guy who did have a use for me. Unless you've spent the past few years in a cave or, say, a subatomic realm, you've probably at least heard of Pym Technologies, or at least Hank Pym. If you haven't, Hank Pym was the inventor of the Pym particle, an incredible scientific breakthrough. Pym particles have the power to cause molecular reduction or expansion at great scales in either direction. In other words, they can make anything super small or super big. Hank and his wife, Janet Van Dyne, put this to direct use on themselves, performing countless heroic deeds as the original Ant-Man and the Wasp. And outside of the superhero game, Hank started a serious R&D operation known as Pym Technologies. But a few years ago, Pymtech fell into the unscrupulous hands of people who wanted to exploit his discoveries for use on the battlefield, and to sell the resulting technology to folks we really do not want to be in battle with. By then, Hank had been pushed out of the company that literally had his last name on the door, but he knew that what was being planned with his invention and that it had to be stopped. So he, let's say, hired me to recover his creations from Pymtech. Whoa, 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 Scott, is probably what you're saying right now. How did we jump from custody disputes to biotech espionage? Well, right about the time I was stumbling out of prison, trying to find myself, Hank Pym, who I didn't know at the time, found me. Hank had done his research on me and knew I was skilled at both electronics and thievery, and most importantly, he knew that I had nothing left to lose. Unbeknownst to me, he tested me by enticing me to steal the Ant-Man suit from his highly formidable safe. Once I succeeded at that, Hank and his daughter Hope Van Dyne kinda stole me from police custody, offered me the gig as if I had a choice, and then trained me to pull off one of the craziest high-tech heists ever. So return the potentially world-threatening military technology to its rightful creator and it's back to peace again, right? Wrong. Literally no sooner had I pulled off the Pymtech operation with an assist from some old prison pals and some extremely skilled ants, than I found myself face to face with the Avengers. Well, two of them anyway. Captain America and the Falcon. Believe me, two's more than enough. I'd already had a tussle with the Falcon, but now he and Cap, as I would soon be calling him, no big deal, actually wanted my help. Wow, I mean, wow. It wasn't just cranky old semi-retired scientists tracking me down anymore. Now I'd caught the attention of Earth's mightiest. So what they wanted me for was a bit messy. Basically, the Avengers had a huge internal divide over something too complicated to get into here, and Captain Falcon wanted some fresh and highly size-adaptable muscle on their side. Especially when all of this culminated in a huge Avengers versus Avengers fracas at an airport in Germany. Germany! I just spent 3 years in a tiny cell. Now I was suddenly doing Europe? I don't want to get into the details of the conflict, and in fact, I'm under legal obligation not to, but let's just say I might have been on the more badass side of it. In the end, the whole fight got resolved, as I think you know. Otherwise, our planet would be a scorched battlefield of never-ending intra-Avengers smackdowns. So, peace on Earth now? Nope. That's when, thanks to Thanos, half of all life in the universe disappeared. So no peace on Earth or anywhere else. I wasn't around for those 5 years of missing people. You'll find out why soon. But I came back just in time. Jumped to a different timeline, fought like every bad guy in the universe on a field in upstate New York, helped the Avengers stop Thanos, and put all the people back where they belonged. Including, last but not least, putting my precious Hope back together with me. As you might imagine, that was a lot. So in the time since, I've been trying to take things a bit easier, nursing wounds, reconnecting with those I've missed, reflecting on what it all means. Oh, yes, and of course, writing this book. And if you want to really get to know who Scott Lang is, reading this book is where I'd recommend you start. So at this point, I bet you'd also have a very serious question, one which I've asked myself over 1,000 times a day while writing this. Why on earth is Scott Lang the first superhero writing a book? I mean, just between us, I'm proud to be an Avenger, but sometimes I also feel like a latecomer. Sure, I came through in the ultimate clutch, but in baseball terms, I'm not a starter. I'm a DH, designated hero. Here's how I see it. I'm the everyman Avenger. I'm the one you could grab a beer with, the one you'd feel okay asking to look after your dog when you're away or for a drive to the airport. I'm not a super soldier or a billionaire, unless this book is super successful. Just a regular dad, a San Francisco Giants fan, and a guy who's made mistakes I'm still trying to rectify. In a word, I'm an ordinary guy who's been thrust, more than once, into extraordinary circumstances. And I know that still doesn't completely answer the question of why I wrote this book. The simple answer, the Avengers asked me to. One day, Bruce, the Hulk Banner, and Clint Hawkeye Barton took me out for lunch. They said they were concerned that the world didn't really know what had happened with Thanos and the blip and our long struggle to finally put things right again. At first, as I usually do when confronted with heavy topics, I make a joke. I'm pretty sure at least half the world knows what happened. Ba-dum-bum-bum. Terrible. Bruce responded that yes, of course, billions had experienced these jarring and mind-bending events, but they didn't know the full story behind them. And ultimately, that's what people need the most to get through and get past traumatic events. A narrative that helps it all make sense. Okay, I agreed. Solid plan. So who are you going to get to tell the story? Clint answered, you, Scott. You're the guy who got scooped up in all this pretty recently. You still got one foot in their world, and you're a guy everyone likes and trusts. And Bruce sealed the deal. It's tough stuff, and no one knows how to keep it light like you. Well, I still had tons of doubts. I was hardly an eyewitness to almost all that history. I hadn't been around for the Battle of Wakanda, or any of the events that led to Thanos gathering the various Infinity Stones. But pretty much immediately I knew what my answer would be. As far as I'm concerned, when the Avengers ask you to do a job, any job, you say yes. So I did. 2 quick handshakes. Bruce, now permanently in his Hulk body, made sure to keep his not too firm. And it was settled. They'd supply me all the archival footage and documentation, take me anywhere I needed to go, and let me ask as many questions as I needed. The only thing is, it wasn't actually 100% settled for me on the inside. From the confidence peak of having 2 amazing superheroes place their trust in you, there was a frighteningly steep plummet into self-doubt. Even when there's sensible reasons, the whole affair just stirred up a question that's been burning inside me most of my adult life. Why me? I've been asking that since before I met the Avengers, back when I was working at VistaCorp. Why was I the only one who couldn't sleep at night after learning of all that money they were stealing from customers? Why did I basically give up my job, give up my marriage, and spend 3 years in San Quentin just so I could play Robin Hood? And finally, and this one still smarts, when VistaCorp's nasty business became public to the world, why was I the one who ended up going down for it? I don't know the answers to these questions, and perhaps I never will. Not even Doctor Strange can tell me. And believe me, it's not for my lack of asking. Once the purple dust had settled from the Battle of Earth, I tried bonding with the guy. Let's just say he was either unwilling or uninterested in filling me in about any of my 14,605 possible pasts. But here's to what I do know, that VistaCorp/prison experience taught me that our world is broken, and that it's never going to get fixed unless folks like me, the unlikely ones, step up to the job. And when Hank Pym plucked me out of the ex-con pool and put me to work as Ant-Man 2.0, I started to see the haziest outlines of a why for me. Maybe all those hard years I had just endured were actually preparation for a higher purpose. Which is a good thing, because right after my first outing as a hero, I was drafted into that aforementioned very scary and sort of confusing business with the Avengers, fighting other Avengers in Germany. I was sent to an underwater super max prison, and once again I had to take the fall and spend 2 more years in detention under house arrest. Why me again? Still no perfect lock on the answer, but I was beginning to glimpse one. This is going to sound beyond weird for a guy whose success and often life depends on quantum mechanics, but I basically had a feeling. Even as I was yanked from one seemingly unthinkable scenario to another, asked to do things I would have never dreamed possible, I began to see that many incredible things were, in fact, possible, and I was doing them, and they started to feel more and more, for lack of a better word, right. I know this is the kind of feeling my Avengers pals feel mid-mission or mid-battle, and maybe they've gotten used to it, but I'm just finally getting there. To the feeling that even when faced with the most terrifying foes imaginable, even with the odds exponentially stacked against you, if you are working side by side with others to serve a greater good, you are in the right place, doing the right thing for you. And honestly, that's the real story behind the entire Avengers saga. It's the one I thought was most essential to share with all of you. That was the deeper reason I said yes to those two Avengers at the lunch counter. Because I knew that once again I was being called to do what seemed impossible, or at least highly inadvisable. But instead, I've let the feeling take a hold and guide me. And I realized what I needed to share the feeling and I realized that I needed to share that feeling with you. Because at the end of the day, nobody can tell where life is going to yank them unexpectedly and seemingly beyond their reach. Steve Rogers signed up to fight, imagining he'd only go as far as a scrawny guy can get in wartime. Tony Stark was brilliant and successful, but I know a part of him wondered if he'd ever get out from under his dad's shadow. Even Doctor Strange, in all his professional success, could never have imagined becoming a master of the mystic arts, or even that such a thing existed. And that same unpredictability is just as true for you as it is for me. What would you do if life shrunk you down and tossed you into a bathtub being filled by your former prison buddies? Okay, that one might just be me. But how about when life sends you unexpectedly packing from your gig of 3 years and straight into a jail cell because you dared to blow the whistle on your company's greed? You don't ask why, you ask, where do I go from here? Because that's the job life has for you, at least right at this moment. And it's the kind of job you don't get to quit. You can run, but you can't hide, not even if you can shrink yourself down and leap into a bathtub. Now, I know I said before that I don't technically have a superpower, but looked at another way, I actually do. And the even cooler part is, so do all of you. Having the ability to change my size at will, I've seen that the world is full of big guys and little guys, And unsurprisingly, the former is always stepping on the latter. Sometimes this is by design, but sometimes just because of their status and drive, the big folks don't even see the everyday hardworking folks just trying to get by. That's why it's always the job of people like me, and as I'm going to show you throughout this book, you, to look out for the little guy. There's something we all have, a superpowered ability to do if we simply choose to accept the job. You are in this place and for a reason and no one else is. And so, when the next uncertain, unlikely, impossible step is revealed to you, I urge you with every particle in my body, Pim or otherwise, to turn that why me into a why not me. At least that's what I tried to do when I promised the Avengers I would tell their story, and the best way I know how to do that is by telling mine at the same time. Because as I've learned, whenever I start to talk about something big that happened, I also see the little lessons that can be learned from it. And I want to share that to help myself and others. Maybe it's because I didn't get the chance to be act before I read this next part. There's a picture of him. Maybe it's because I didn't get the chance to be around my daughter Cassie for so many chunks of her life to share what I'd learned with her. I'm still working on that, but it's hard now that she's a grown up herself who's already seen and experienced so much without me to guide her. I missed the boat on that one. But believe me, you are in for an entire book of dad wisdom, just burning for a home. So that's what I plan to do in this book. I'm going to tell it all from how saw it, experienced it, and heard it firsthand from my hero buddies. I'm going to bring you into the hero world. Along the way, you'll hear about my story, Scott Lang's story, from where I started to the Ant-Man I've become, and I'm still becoming. Because I'm so incredibly fascinating? No, because my life, just like yours, loses half its value if we don't find a way to share its lessons with others. And finally, because if you take nothing else away from my words, what I want to share is that what makes all of us giants is how much we look out for the little guy, how we help out our fellow humans when they need it most, how our greatest superpower can simply be a listening ear, a concerned eye, or an outstretched hand, how we don the hero's uniform by simply showing up and doing the unbelievably unlikely job that life has just handed us. And speaking of jobs, I've got an entire rest of a book to write. Oh, why did I agree to this? Why me? Great introduction. I'm going to go quickly check how long the next, oh, perfect. It's not a very long next chapter. So we're going to go right into the next chapter here. Redos and redon'ts. Some people say the hardest thing in life is starting something, but I say it's starting all over again. There's a famous Chinese proverb, usually attributed to Lao Tzu, that goes, "The journey of 1,000 miles begins with a single step." But in my relatively short lifetime, I've had my share of wipe the slate clean, I got nothing restarts. For instance, have you ever been released from prison? One day you're on schedule with people telling you what to do 24/7. The next you're so helpless, it's like a second infancy. Don't know where to go, where to live, and no one will hire you for work. And in my case, there wasn't even family to return to. My ex was remarrying, and to my young daughter, I was more like a rumor than an actual person. And then, of course, there was trying to get my bearings after returning from the quantum realm. That was already strange enough, just being back in a place where things like time and matter and Scott's brain work in a way I am used to. How now add in the fact that in what seemed like just a few hours to me, years had apparently passed for the rest of the world. I know this doesn't even compare to the experience all of you had going through it in real time. I can't even imagine what that was like, having half the world and probably half the people you care about just disappear. It's a lot for anyone to wrap their heads around, but I'm going to try a little later in the book. At that moment, this indescribable wave of human loss was only starting to hit me with full force. I was 5 years behind the rest of the world just trying to process it. Then it suddenly got super personal. As soon as I came to learn my new adopted family, Hank, Hope, and Janet, were also no more. The one saving grace was that I got my daughter Cassie back. But once again, I'd lost yet another few years of her already growing up too fast life. And finally, there was, of course, my new work family, the Avengers. It's okay, Bodhi. It's okay. Awesome role models, and I'd like to think friends. But what made things extra disorienting for me at this moment was just a supreme confusion over who I was and what I was supposed to be. I was someone who just reinvented himself from ex-con to hero guy, and now I walked into a world where I'd completely missed out on the chance to be a hero and stop literally the biggest threat to humankind of all time. My point is, in multiple situations, I've had to hit the reset button on my own life. And every single time, no matter how many times you do it, it's hard and it's scary. We humans tend to get addicted to the familiar, even in nearly intolerable situations. We cling like hell to what we know. So what happens when those things disappear and we're left flailing in midair with nothing left to cling to? I'll get into this in more detail in a second, but basically we have to find a new unexplored part of ourselves to latch onto. That's how we climb back up into being a new us in a new world. I'm seeing a lot of this fear and confusion right now among my friends. With the existential threat of Thanos behind us, a bunch of my hero peers are just learning for the first time how to move on, whether it's passing the torch, or hammer or shield or bow and arrow to someone new, or like Hope, trading in the wasp suit for a corporate pantsuit. For me, all I'm trying to do is focus on right now. It's okay, Bodhi. For me, all I'm trying to focus on right now is finishing this book. And when I'm done, I'll certainly be trying to figure out my own next chapter. But here's the surprising part. Having been around this existential merry-go-round a few times now, this time, I'm actually kind of psyched for the wild and unpredictable ride awaiting me next. What's my secret? Well, you know the old cliche, when life gives you lemons, make lemonade. That cliche wants to force you to create your next move out of what you've been given. But there's one very important word that's often ignored. You. Hi. In other words, forget the lemons. Life has already given you you that's like no other. And that's what you're better off making stuff out of. But how do you find that you to build on? Based on my experiences, I've broken it into 2 steps. Excuse me while I get a drink of water. Number 1, allow yourself to mourn what's gone. Bawl your eyes out. This is really key to the whole you finding process because it helps clarify what part of you was tied up in other people and things and what lives on. And it needs to be said out loud because a lot of people think that shedding a single tear will dissolve their defenses. I can't tell you after I emerged from the quantum realm into a post-blip world how many nights I soaked my pillow with tears. And all of that, of course, reminds me of what I miss coming out of prison. Too much of my little girl's childhood. Don't get me wrong, we had a lot of good times later on, but I can never get those years back. How sad can you be about losing something you never had? Turns out very. Just remember one thing though. Tears are acidic, which means they dissolve stuff, but not just chemically, spiritually. They don't dissolve your strength. They dissolve the glue that keeps you sealed into an earlier version of yourself. The idea that I can only be me with one specific group of people in one specific context. But if you think about it, your whole life, indeed everyone's, moves through a mind boggling variety of situations and people. Nothing stays the same. Nobody sticks around forever. So we have a choice. We can spend our lives clinging to what we know, or we can grab as many memories as possible and move on to what's new and maybe even better ahead of us. And sometimes the noise of that decision to move ahead can be quite loud and painful. So I say embrace the tears. Be loud, be proud, be soggy, and let it all out. Because yes, loss hurts, but so do most things that make you better. Don't dam up that flood. Let it roll over you because in the end it will wash you clean. Not of the past, just the voice telling you to stay there. Man, that's deep. And there's another picture of him saying Hank did him a solid getting him the Ant-Man gig. And then number 2 is figure out how to rebuild. I know what you're thinking. Easy for you to say, Scott. You're an Avenger. You probably have tons of resources at your disposal. You could pull off a full redo after every major event in your life. But what I'm talking about is not changing your physical circumstances. I mean, rebuilding the idea of what you're capable of. You 2.0, or 3.0, or 4.0, wherever you are on your journey. So how do you do that? The first and probably most crucial step is separate out what you and others say you are from what you can do. Shift your focus from adjectives to verbs. When I first came out of the slammer, recruiters called me unemployable, and my ex-wife Maggie called me unreliable. Ouch, but ultimately those are just descriptors, and descriptors can change. By contrast, through his actions, Hank Pym told me that I was really good at sneaking in and stealing things. Not the world's best compliment, I admit. Even if that's about the highest praise anyone ever gets from Hank Pym. But Hank had a clear purpose behind that clear-eyed assessment of me. He wanted me to steal for a good reason, and he wanted the guy who's best at it. Over time, Hank showed me how to find that best guy within me by redirecting who I already was into a guy who still snuck in and stole things, but in a different way and for a nobler cause. And you know what? Hank was right. I was good at stealing for good. Even when I fumbled at recovering the Space Stone during the time heist. Don't worry, all those worlds will make sense soon. It's only because Loki was better at stealing. Not that I'm bad at it, but we're talking Loki. Not a fair comparison. In brief, I took the worst thing about me and found a way to do that thing for a better cause. Likewise, when I came out of the quantum realm and found half the planet gone, at first I was consumed with one unanswerable question. Why was I spared when so many weren't? I quickly got locked into describing myself as unworthy. You see? More of those unhelpful and paralyzing descriptors. Fortunately, I didn't have the luxury of wallowing in those feelings, and frankly, no one even wanted to hear it. I was 5 years behind everyone else who had already endured enough pain going through this. I was experiencing a common psychological feeling, survivor's guilt. But eventually I started to shift my perspective and rethink that term, starting with the descriptor. I mean, guilt? The only person even calling me guilty for surviving Thanos was me. So I redirected my focus onto the survivor part that transformed my thinking. Now I began to tell myself, I'm good at surviving. How can I bring more of that into the world? That's what drove my mind back to the time shenanigans I'd observed in the quantum realm, and that's what made me crash Avengers Compound. So to take a step back, how does someone who has lost everything achieve a redo? The key to a redo is the do. You rebuild your life, and sometimes rebuild it, and sometimes even rebuild it by embracing these 3 facts. You are so much more than who you were, especially as you get further away from what shaped you in the past. You aren't limited by who you are, or at least the way others describe you. You are what you can do. To rebuild is to take what you know how to do, no matter how unconventional or questionable that skill might seem to you now, and figure out how to do it differently. How to use it to take your life in a new direction, a better one. And then we have a frequently asked Ant-Man questions section, it looks like, as a break. So I'm going to go ahead and read that real quick because this is the end of that chapter. And then I will see how long the next chapter is and make a decision from there. But frequently asked Ant-Man questions, or FAMQ as it is abbreviated. As a superhero, I meet a lot of people with a lot of questions. And here's the funny but sometimes annoying thing. They're often the exact same handful of questions, and it's never the one I really want to hear. Will you take a picture with my dog? Even though an ant's jaw is famously strong, my human jaw sometimes gets tired of answering the same thing over and over. So, to help all my fans and my poor mandible, I thought I'd include my most frequently asked questions and answer throughout this book. Aren't I thoughtful that way? So, here's the first one. I know you can shrink down to quantum size, but is there a limit to how big you can get? Answer. To be perfectly honest, that's one of those Hank Pym questions that I hate to ask him, because he takes everything as a critique. Oh, so it doesn't get big enough for you now. Why do you need to get bigger? But seriously, from what I've experienced, self-enlargement is something any user of the Ant-Man and Wasp suit needs to be really careful with. For a variety of reasons, it takes a big toll on the human body, or at least mine. For one thing, going big puts a strain on my nervous system, so if my size hits a certain threshold, I start to see things, like specifically the ground coming toward me fast. So the next chapter is not too long either. So we'll go ahead and do this one, and we'll end with chapter 2. We've done the introduction in chapter 1, and then we'll end with chapter 2 and another FAMQ. Making your house arrest a home arrest. Another question I get asked a lot, one that takes a bit longer to answer, is Scott, what did you do while trapped in your house for 2 years? This is going to sound beyond ironic, but those 2 years sequestered under house arrest, my sentence for joining some Avengers and who were on the wrong side of the law, were some of the freest of my life. Here's a few ways I found that freedom. Jailhouse rocking. I wasn't expecting to get any life lessons from prison other than how to survive, but looking back, I can tell you one thing. I learned how to free up my mind and create a whole life out of limited space and mobility, and I brought that freedom to my new digs. For example, the freedom to completely mix up your routine. Go to sleep standing up. Brush your teeth before you eat. For no good reason at all, set your watch to Tokyo time. Have breakfast for dinner, or even more shockingly, dinner for breakfast. These may sound like nothing more than quirky lifestyle tweaks, but what I now realized I was doing was breaking out of a different kind of prison. I'd come to let not only jail, but indeed the whole notion of being an ex-con define me, restrict me from becoming more. And I was hungering to free myself up to become that something more, but with any big change, it's always wisest to start with the small stuff. And finally, those 3 years behind bars made me appreciate getting outside every chance I could. In the slammer, if I was lucky, I'd get 30 minutes on the yard every day, which meant 30 minutes living in fear of getting my butt kicked every day. So after that experience, I spent every minute I could outside trying to keep my tiny, pathetic garden from becoming a delphinium graveyard. Wow, Scott gardening? Mind blown! I know, but my point is I lived in Northern California surrounded by places of epic natural beauty and ignored them. But now, in a little 3 foot by 6 foot patch of dirt, I finally found my connection to the planet I was so often fighting to save. Man caving. Did you know you can order literally anything delivered to your home? Except, it turns out, a key to an ankle monitor. Of course you did, and our world is adorned with massive piles of cardboard boxes as tall as Stark Tower to prove it. That is why I tried to limit my purchases, and was extremely selective with what I ordered. I guided my decisions by one thoughtful, ironclad purchasing principle. What will eat up the most time? Naturally, that meant starting with a gaming console, but to really get the most out of the experience, one of the new habits I was trying to pick up while confined, no matter how frustrated I got, I would never ever use a cheat code. Another good life lesson right there. Cheat codes. What are those? We don't use those anymore. We just download shit to make. They're called mods now. I also expanded my interests, learning close-up magic online, reading books I'd always meant to, singing karaoke, something that pre-house arrest Scott was too cool for. But now, though penned in by walls, I was determined to no longer stay penned in by old ways of seeing myself. Another consideration was what will best keep my sanity intact. Now that I was barred by an international body from fighting bad guys, I needed something to pound on, so I decided to learn the drums. This was not only cathartic, it had an added sanity-preserving bonus. When I really cranked it up, my noises were disturbed enough to get neighbors yelling into my windows. Keep it down, or I'm trying to sleep, or learn a second song. Yes, human connection. And attempting to entertain guests in my man cave was always interesting. I'm not a total slob, but also not a fan of cleaning. Let's just say when people ask how I decorated my place, my answer is not. Also, since being kicked out by Maggie and living as a tenant of the state, I didn't really have any cookware of my own. Other than a lot of items I'd ordered to make food for one, is there any phrase in the English language sadder than single serving cake maker? Long story short, I started getting lonely, and I'm the type of guy who needs other people around, or I start talking to myself. So that gets even sadder real quick. So another way I began to reorient my life was toward that important need, really the most important one of all. Keeping up while keeping in. I've already mentioned the lack of a normal social life when an ankle bracelet has turned you into a permanent homebody. But here again, I found that confinement freed me up in an unexpected way. In the past, I somehow never found the time or energy to build and nurture deeper connections with friends. Admittedly, I had never had the most bandwidth for staying on top of my friends' lives, and that only got worse as I got wrapped up in marriage and having a kid. But now, freed of any demands on my time or energy, life had thrown me the keys to go outside my bubble and make an extra effort to maintain contact with everyone. Before long, I had turned friendship from a lazy hobby into a disciplined habit. By the end of my stay, I had schedules, calendars, speed dial settings. I kept in touch by every method, calling, emailing, and even using some annoying video conference platform, which I guess could catch on one day. For a guy who was always in one place in my friends' lives, I was everywhere. And of course, the sweetest irony of all that was that being stuck here meant I could get joyfully stuck with my favorite person of all. Cassieing it up. House arrest literally gave me the opportunity of a lifetime, finally getting to hang with my precious Cassie. So much time to make up for, so many things I wanted to do with her. But since we couldn't go out, I had to figure out how to replicate all those activities while still inside the house. Fortunately, even the minimal amount of deliveries I'd had still left me with a decent supply of delivery box cardboard to work with. So that was the dawn of the cardboard roller coaster, the cardboard robot war, the cardboard pony ride, and in one ill-considered move, the cardboard water park. One advantage of having a house decorated bachelor style is that there's just about nothing for you to break or stain, and even if you do, no one will care. I didn't have Hope around to disapprove my mess, which I have to admit gave me a slight twinge of sadness every time I made one. So instead, I leaned into the other special girl in my life and gave her every inch of grubby floor I could. Now, despite what I said earlier about trying to kill time with Cassie, it was quite the opposite. Now, despite what I said earlier about trying to kill time, with Cassie, it was quite the opposite. Every second flew by faster than a magical hammer returning to Thor's hand. And I wanted so badly for it to slow down. Man, if only I had known about quantum tunneling then, I still would not wanted to open that can of wormholes. And then before I go on to the next paragraph, there is a nice picture of Scott Lang and Cassie. Because as I was learning with Cassie and all these other experiences, the worst way to live is to spend your life running away from your limitations. Instead, you have to learn how to embrace them and transform them. And in the process, yourself. It was part of a little something I call the freedom paradox. I know it sounds screwy under normal conditions. All day long, I have nothing but options. I can basically fly, well, at least while riding an ant or catching a ride with Hope. I can also see anything macro or micro, and not to put too fine a point on it, but right now I don't exactly have a day job. But here's the thing, when you're pulled in all directions at all times and you can lose sight of what really matters in your life, yes, your life is technically physically free, but at the same time, you're not necessarily living your life. You're seeking comfort or avoiding pain, putting out fires, operating on muscle memory, and most of all, just plain getting distracted. You're a hamster on a wheel of your own making. I know this because living in the same place day in, day out was the first thing in my decades of life that actually concentrated my mind on what I really wanted most and how to get it. But it did even more than that. It focused my intentions on uncovering who I really was. In my opinion, that's a critical quest all of us should go on. The one to find our truest self. The problem is, there are just too many other options pulling us away from it. But when I had the most of those options removed and had literally nowhere else to go, I was finally able to go inside. So you could say I spent those 24 months doing nothing. Nothing but talking with friends a lot, learning to appreciate the simple blessings of my life, and trying new things. By which I really mean trying out new versions of me, and of course rollicking in pure joy with Cassie. And you know what? That's not nothing. That's everything. And I think that's where we're going to stop for this evening, folks. After we do the fam Q. Come here, Bodhi. We're going to do a frequently asked Ant-Man question. Besides having wings, is the Wasp suit the same as the Ant-Man one? First of all, I'm going to pause on that. Besides, because I've still never gotten a good explanation from Hank about this obviously glaring injustice. He always mumbles some tech gibberish about a lift drag issues, and then suddenly he has a meeting. But there are two main differences between the Wasp and Ant-Man suits that I am aware of. One of these are these wrist-mounted gauntlets that can fire powerful blasters, which Hope is used in some key battles. The other difference, which I admittedly don't fully understand, is a more intuitive as opposed to manual control system. Basically, I have to use buttons to change size, whereas Hope can just control this feature with her mind. This allows her to amplify her strength, and considering how strong she is at normal size, let me just say, do not mess with the tiny Wasp. Very interesting. So we have completed the introduction and the first two chapters of Look Out for the Little Guy by Scott Lang. Well, really, a guy named, where was his name? Rob Kuttner. Really, but fantastic so far. Look out for the little guy. Definitely did not mean what I thought it was going to mean originally. I'm glad it was talked about early on. I'm very, very pleased so far. And everybody, I hope you are all now tucked in and ready for a nice evening after this great bedtime story. And we will continue more on Wednesday or Thursday evening. Tomorrow I will be playing Dungeons and Dragons, so I will not be able to read for you. But thank you for hanging out for this first episode of Bedtime Stories, and good night all, and good night all.